Did you know that Iran, yes, modern-day Iran, plays a major role in the Bible? The media may paint one picture, but the scriptures reveal something much deeper. There's a hidden truth that connects Iran to God's unfolding plan throughout history and into the future. And what you're about to discover, they rarely teach in church. If you've ever wondered how ancient empires tie into biblical prophecy, or what role Iran may play in God's eternal story, then stay with me, because what you're about to hear might challenge everything you thought you knew. Iran, known in ancient times as Persia, holds a remarkable and often overlooked place in biblical history. While modern perspectives may focus on Iran's current geopolitical status, the Bible tells a story that stretches back thousands of years, connecting the land of Persia to pivotal moments in God's plan for His people. Persia is not merely mentioned in passing, but plays a central role in some of the most significant events recorded in Scripture. Understanding this connection sheds light on the divine orchestration of history and God's ability to use any nation to fulfill His purposes. The name Persia appears prominently in several books of the Bible, including Daniel, Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah. In the book of Daniel, Persia is seen as the empire that followed Babylon. After the Babylonian Empire fell, the Medo-Persian Empire rose to power. Daniel himself lived during the transition between these two empires, serving in the royal courts of both Babylonian and Persian kings. This transition was not just a change in political power, it was a fulfillment of prophecy. God had revealed to Daniel that different kingdoms would rise and fall, each playing a role in the unfolding of His redemptive plan. One of the most compelling references to Persia is found in Daniel chapter 10, where the angel Gabriel speaks of being delayed by Prince of the Kingdom of Persia. This isn't referring to a human prince, but rather to a spiritual being, suggesting that behind the physical empire of Persia, spiritual forces were at work. This passage reveals a profound truth about the spiritual dimensions of earthly kingdoms. It reminds us that while human history plays out on the surface, there is a deeper, unseen battle taking place in the spiritual realm. Persia, in this context, was not only a political power, but also a stage upon which spiritual warfare was being fought. In the book of Ezra, Persia emerges as a surprising ally to the Jewish people. After decades of captivity in Babylon, the Jewish exiles were allowed to return to Jerusalem. This was made possible by a decree from Cyrus, the king of Persia. Cyrus not only permitted the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple, but he also returned the sacred items that had been taken from the temple by the Babylonians. This act of restoration was unprecedented. A foreign king, ruling over a vast empire, took deliberate steps to honor the God of Israel and to help His people restore their worship. This was not coincidence, it was the fulfillment of prophecy. The prophet Isaiah had named Cyrus by name over a century before he was born, declaring that he would be the one to set God's people free and support the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. The story continues in the book of Esther, which takes place in the Persian capital of Susa. Here, Persia serves as the backdrop for one of the most dramatic and courageous stories in the Bible. Esther, a young Jewish woman, becomes queen of Persia and risks her life to save her people from annihilation. Through her bravery and the providence of God, the Jewish people were delivered from a plot to destroy them. This story, while personal and intimate, is set against the broader stage of the Persian Empire, and once again shows how God used Persia as a vessel to protect and preserve His chosen people. Persia also appears in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the Persian king Artaxerxes and was granted permission to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the city's walls. Not only was he given royal permission, but he was also provided with materials and protection for the journey. Again, a Persian king played a vital role in the restoration of Jerusalem. These repeated instances of Persian support for the Jewish people are not accidental. They show a consistent pattern of God using Persia as a tool in his hands to accomplish his purposes. The presence of Persia in the Bible reveals a truth that is as relevant today as it was then. God is sovereign over all nations. He can use kings, empires, and even non-believers to bring about his will. Persia, modern-day Iran, stands as a historical testament to this truth. Its legacy in Scripture is not one of opposition to God, but of surprising obedience, support, and involvement in some of the most critical moments in biblical history. Understanding Iran as ancient Persia helps us see the deeper layers of God's work across time and nations. One of the most astonishing revelations in the Bible is that God refers to Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, as his anointed. This title, typically reserved for priests and kings of Israel, is given to a Gentile ruler who did not know the God of Israel. In Isaiah 45, written over a century before Cyrus was even born, the prophet declares that God has chosen Cyrus to subdue nations, open doors, and set the Jewish people free. The prophecy specifically states that God will go before Cyrus, break down gates of bronze, and give him treasures hidden in darkness. The most remarkable part is that God says he is doing this for the sake of Jacob, his servant, and Israel, his chosen. Even though Cyrus did not acknowledge God, he was still used as a divine instrument to fulfill God's promises. Cyrus's rise to power marked the end of the Babylonian Empire and the beginning of the Medo-Persian rule. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree that allowed the Jews, who had been in captivity for 70 years, to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This decree, recorded in the book of Ezra, was not only a political gesture, but a direct fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy that the exile would last 70 years. Cyrus not only permitted the Jews to return, but also returned the sacred temple articles that had been taken by Nebuchadnezzar. Furthermore, he provided funds and support to aid in the rebuilding effort. His actions were unusually generous and favorable to the Jewish people, especially coming from a gentle ruler of a vast and diverse empire. This moment in history is profound because it demonstrates that God's sovereignty extends beyond the boundaries of Israel. God is not limited to using only those who believe in him or are part of his covenant people. He can raise up any leader from any nation to accomplish his purposes. The calling of Cyrus reveals the vastness of God's authority and the intentionality with which he orchestrates world events. It also highlights the truth that God prepares the way long before events unfold. Naming Cyrus over a century before his birth is not just prophetic. It is a declaration of divine control over history. Cyrus's actions had a monumental impact on the Jewish people. His decree enabled the return of exiles, the rebuilding of the temple, and the restoration of national identity and religious practice in Jerusalem. This return from exile was a pivotal moment in Jewish history and set the stage for the events leading up to the New Testament. Without Cyrus's obedience to the divine prompting, this chapter of restoration might have looked very different. His willingness to support the Jews all suggests that he recognized something unique about their God. While he may not have been a worshiper of Yahweh in the traditional sense, His respect and support for the Jewish faith point to a man who was open to divine influence. The recognition of Cyrus as anointed also breaks religious stereotypes. In a time when nations worshipped their own gods and alliances were built around shared religious and cultural identities, the God of Israel reaches into a foreign kingdom and raises up a king to bless his people. This act shows that God's plans are not confined to borders, ethnicity, or religious affiliation. He can work through anyone, at any time, to bring his promises to life. This truth is a powerful reminder to believers today that God is not limited by human systems or expectations. Cyrus's legacy lives on not just in the Bible but also in world history. He is known for his forward-thinking leadership, religious tolerance, and human treatment of those he conquered. The Cyrus Cylinder, often cited as the first declaration of human rights, confirms his reputation as a just and wise ruler. For believers, this aligns perfectly with how Scripture portrays him, as a man chosen by God for a specific and holy task. His story serves as a model of how God can use unexpected people in unexpected ways to fulfill his divine agenda. In calling Cyrus his anointed, God gave the world a glimpse into his power, his grace, and his mysterious ways. Cyrus's story is not just history, it is divine history, carefully written by the hand of God to show that he rules over kings and kingdoms. The Bible does not merely mention Persia as a historic empire. It also includes Persia in its prophetic vision of the future. One of the most striking references is found in Ezekiel chapter 38, where Persia is listed among the nations that will join a powerful alliance against Israel in the latter days. This passage, often referred to as the prophecy of Gog and Magog, outlines a future conflict in which a coalition of nations will rise against the land of Israel. Persia is specifically named alongside other regions such as Cush and Put, which correspond to modern-day areas in North Africa and parts of the Middle East. This inclusion is not incidental. It signifies that Persia, known today as Iran, will play a significant role in the final unfolding of biblical prophecy. Ezekiel describes Gog as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, often interpreted as a leader from the region of modern-day Russia or Eastern Europe, who will gather nations for a large-scale invasion of Israel. Persia's involvement in this alliance implies that Iran will be part of a broader coalition that seeks to challenge or destroy Israel in the end times. This has profound implications, especially considering the current geopolitical climate and the modern relationship between Iran and Israel. While we must be careful not to force current events into ancient texts, the alignment of nations mentioned in Ezekiel with modern political realities is striking. The prophecy suggests that hostility toward Israel, especially from Iran, is not new and has roots in ancient spiritual and historical dynamics. The significance of Persia's role in this prophecy is further amplified when we understand that the invasion will provoke a divine response. God declares in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that he will intervene supernaturally to defend Israel. The invading armies will be defeated not Israel's military might, but by divine judgment through natural disasters, confusion among enemy ranks, and overwhelming power from heaven. This judgment will serve a higher purposing, to reveal God's glory to the nations and to make his name known among both Israel and the nations of the world. Persia, as part of this coalition, becomes an instrument in the hands of prophecy, demonstrating both human rebellion and divine sovereignty. The prophetic inclusion of Persia reminds us that the Bible sees history and the future through a spiritual lens. Nations are not just political entities, but part of a spiritual narrative that spans time. Persia's presence in end-time prophecy shows that God's knowledge and plans extend across centuries, tying together ancient empires and future events with perfect accuracy. This challenges us to see beyond the headlines and understand that global movements may be influenced by forces far beyond what is visible. The alignment of Iran with other nations mentioned in Ezekiel is not random. It reflects deep-rooted spiritual realities and divine foresight that the Bible unveils. This prophecy also calls believers to remain watchful and grounded in Scripture. As we observe the increasing tensions in the Middle East and the ongoing hostility between Iran and Israel, we are reminded that God has already spoken about such alliances. However, the focus of the prophecy is not just on the threat, but on the outcome. God will show His power in unmistakable ways, and through the events of the last days, people from all nations will come to recognize His authority. The role of Persia in this prophecy is not simply about judgment. It is also about revelation. Through these events, God will make Himself known. Another important aspect is the reassurance that believers can draw from these prophecies. While the rise of hostile nations may seem alarming, the Bible assures us that none of it is beyond God's control. He sees the end from the beginning, and every move of every nation ultimately serves His greater plan. Persia's inclusion in this future conflict shows that even powerful nations cannot escape God's timing or purposes. What may appear to be chaos or danger in the world is often part of a larger, divinely orchestrated plan that is moving toward the fulfillment of God's promises. Understanding Persia's role in biblical prophecy gives us insight not only into the future, but also into God's character. He is just, sovereign, and faithful to defend His people. While the nations rage, He remains on the throne, directing history toward a conclusion that will glorify His name and establish His kingdom forever. Throughout the Bible, Persia is shown not as a mere bystander, but as a nation that God actively used to fulfill His promises to His people. From liberating the Jews from Babylonian captivity to supporting the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, Persia served as an unexpected yet powerful agent in God's redemptive plan. This truth is a profound reminder that God's purposes are not confined to the people of Israel alone. He moves through nations, kings, and empires to accomplish what He has spoken, even when those instruments may not recognize Him directly. The involvement of Persia in these divine acts was not accidental. It was part of a carefully orchestrated design that reveals the vastness of God's authority and the faithfulness of His covenant. When the Jews were exiled in Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem, it appeared as though God's promises were on hold. The temple lay in ruins, the people were scattered, and hope seemed distant. But God had already prepared a way. Through the rise of the Persian Empire and the leadership of King Cyrus, God initiated a miraculous return. Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to go back to their homeland and rebuild the house of the Lord. This moment was not just a political decision. It was a spiritual breakthrough. It showed that God had not forgotten His people. Even in a foreign land under the rule of a Gentile king, God's hand was at work, guiding events to fulfill His word spoken through the prophets. Ezra records how King Cyrus acknowledged that the God of heaven had charged him to build a house for Him in Jerusalem. Whether or not Cyrus fully understood the God of Israel, he obeyed the divine calling placed upon him. He not only allowed the Jews to return but provided them with silver, gold, goods, livestock, and freewill offerings for the temple. He even returned the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the original temple. This act of restoration signified more than just generosity. It was a divine reversal. What had been lost in judgment was now being restored through grace, and Persia was the vessel chosen by God to carry out that grace. Later, other Persian kings continued this legacy. Darius confirmed the decree of Cyrus and added further support to the rebuilding of the temple. Artaxerxes, another Persian king, gave Nehemiah permission and resources to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. In each instance, the Persian rulers acted in favor of the Jewish people, not by coincidence but by divine design. These events display the ongoing theme that God can use even the most unlikely people to advance His purposes. The kings of Persia were not part of Israel, yet they became key figures in one of the most significant seasons of restoration in Jewish history. The story of Esther also unfolds within the Persian Empire. Esther, a Jewish girl, became queen, and through her courage, she saved her people from destruction. The king of Persia, though initially unaware of the plot against the Jews, ultimately sided with Esther and Mordecai and authorized the defense of the Jewish people. This deliverance, celebrated in the Feast of Purim, again shows Persia as a context in which God preserved His people. While Persia was a foreign power, it was in that very setting that God demonstrated His protective hand and covenant faithfulness. All these examples together create a powerful narrative of how Persia, modern-day Iran, was used in monumental ways to fulfill the promises of God. Whether it was the rebuilding of the temple, the restoration of Jerusalem's walls, or the deliverance of the Jewish people from annihilation, Persia played a central role. These actions were not initiated by Israel, but by Gentile rulers moved by the Spirit of God. This reality breaks down the idea that only the chosen people can be instruments of divine action. God's sovereignty means He can raise up any person or nation to accomplish His will. Persia's place in the biblical story is a testimony to God's ability to work through unexpected sources. It reminds us that no nation is beyond God's reach, and no ruler is beyond His influence. The history of Persia in the Bible is not just about politics or power. It is about promise, restoration, and the unfolding of a divine plan that spans generations. Through Persia, God showed that His word never fails and that His methods are often surprising, but always perfect.